Picture the beautiful Appalachian Mountains. Now, imagine an ancient, dark secret watching you from the deep shadows of the forest. What if I told you there were things out there like the predatory moon-eyed people, nocturnal hunters with translucent skin and glowing milky blue eyes? Tonight, we have 3 Appalachian mountain horror stories inspired by real historical events. But before we get to the moon-eyed people, we start with a legend that has haunted these hollows for centuries: the terrifying Cherokee Little People of the Little River Canyon. I'm the Shadow Teller. Let the nightmare begin. What if the Cherokee legends weren't a metaphor, but a warning? In 1890, ethnologist James Mooney documented the Yunwi Tsunsdi, a hidden race that stayed behind in the deep karst caves of the Appalachian Mountains during the Trail of Tears. History dismissed them as nursery rhymes. But when a river stone shatters your temple and the rock people start drumming your funeral march deep in Appalachia and Alabama, you learn the hard way. The only thing crazy about your father's stories was that he didn't tell you how much it hurts to die. Drew sat in his patrol truck at the rim of Little River Canyon, the engine ticking as it cooled. He reached over to scratch Bear's ears. His knuckles hit the cold, cracked vinyl of a seat that had remained empty for 6 months. The faint scent of green apple shampoo still lingered. This artifact-looting bust meant everything. Day shift rangers had reported fresh dig sites near the canyon floor, prime signs of black market poachers. If he failed tonight, he lost his badge. Without it, nothing stopped him from ending up exactly like his father, locked in an asylum talking to the walls. He gripped the steering wheel. "All right, Drew, let's go." He began the steep 600-foot descent. Intense pressure shifted in the atmosphere. The barometric ear pop ruptured his equilibrium, sending a spike of vertigo through his skull. He winced, digging a finger into his ear canal. God damn already? An agonizing knot suddenly twisted in his gut from a stress-induced IBS flare-up. He stopped dead, pressing a heavy hand against his stomach. "At least I packed the baby wipes," he joked grimly. He clenched his jaw, forcing absolute silence as he stalked the trail. A sharp, familiar whistle pierced the stillness. Bear's exact alert command. Drew pivoted and stopped his boot inches from a hidden 20-foot drop-off concealed by rotting brush. He exhaled a shaky breath. "Good boy, Bear." But the whistle warped into a low, rhythmic drumming vibrating through his boot soles. What the hell is that? Drew stalked the drumming through the dense laurel thickets. His flashlight swept over a patch of freshly overturned earth and a discarded metal trowel. There it is, he thought. The looter's dig site. He reached for his shoulder mic, but the canyon echo bounced a childlike giggle off the limestone walls directly to his right. He lunged toward the noise, but his boot smashed through a false floor of dead leaves. The limestone vise swallowed his leg to the knee, shattering a hidden nest of bald-faced hornets. Angry black bodies swarmed his face, stingers plunging into his neck. "Get off!" he grunted, yanking his leg free. He shed denim and blood, aggressively battering the insects away. Panic spiked. His OCD demanded immediate control. He forced his breathing to slow, performing his 3-tap gear check. Left pocket, right pocket, chest. His knuckles hit an empty space on his tactical vest. The heavy canvas pocket where his EpiPen lived flapped open. He froze. Someone had unzipped it while he struggled in the hole. "I checked that zipper 3 times. I know I did." Venom raced through his bloodstream. His throat tightened to a burning straw. As he pawed frantically at his neck, a small moss-gray hand darted from the shadows and snipped his steel GPS tether with a sharp snap. "Hey!" Drew rasped. but severe IBS cramps doubled him over again. He collapsed, paralyzed by agony as chirping, unnatural laughter echoed above him. The tricksters vanished with his only map and medicine. He scrambled backward toward the sheer canyon wall, but the sandstone above him vibrated with a heavy, warlike thud, thud, thud. "They're up there!" The drumming escalated into a deafening roar. A 200-pound Widowmaker branch cracked free directly over his head. Thick, wait-a-minute vines anchored his bleeding shin to the ground. "Move, move, move!" He dragged his tactical knife across the thorns, sliced himself free, and rolled aside just as the massive limb pulverized the earth where he had stood. He sucked in a whistling breath. But as he looked up, the cliffside rippled with dozens of almond-shaped eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. Drew army-crawled up the steep incline toward the rim. The chrome bumper of his truck gleamed in the distance. Just a few more feet. He reached up, his bloody fingers grazing the door handle. A river stone the size of a baseball slammed into his temple. Bone cracked. Night blindness instantly swallowed his vision, turning the forest into a gray, swirling void. He hit the gravel on his back, his limbs refusing frantic commands to crawl under the truck. His head throbbed with a wet heat. "Get up, Drew." But his muscles were dead weight. A second stone, jagged and heavy, smashed into his cheekbone. The metallic taste of copper flooded his mouth. Then a third rock dropped perfectly onto his sternum. The cartilage fractured with a sickening crunch. He gasped, but his venom-laced throat wouldn't open. The canopy rained down shadows made of solid stone, hit after hit after hit. A flat rock caught his jaw. Another pulverized his left shoulder. Each strike sent a blinding wave of agony through his nervous system. Extreme confusion clouded his mind. What is hitting me? Where are they? Only the sickening thud of granite on bone answered him. He wanted to curl into a fetal position and sob, but he was utterly paralyzed, trapped in a silent shell, forced to feel every shattering blow. He came out here to catch a petty thief, not to be beaten to death in the dark by the very nursery rhymes he spent a lifetime running from. The sheer isolation crushed him heavier than the rocks. Another stone shattered the bridge of his nose. Darkness edged deeper into his brain. This is it. I'm dying alone in the dirt. The brutal pounding suddenly ceased, replaced by the explosion of a fierce, guttural bark. A mangy, half-wild mountain hound leaped over Drew's battered body, snapping its foam-flecked jaws at the small gray figures, driving them back into the brush. Drew used the split-second distraction to lunge into the cab and slam the door. His glazed eyes scanned the dashboard, locking onto the cup holder. His EpiPen rested perfectly inside, returned as a sick, final joke. He grabbed the auto-injector and stabbed his thigh. Oxygen tore into his lungs. He snatched the radio mic with a broken hand. "Officer, down. Need help." He slumped halfway out of the door, his face a mask of torn flesh. He stared at the stray dog standing guard, then at the empty, cracked vinyl seat where Bear used to ride. The realization settled into his bones like ice. Dad, you weren't crazy. I was just blind. If you think Drew's survival is just another mountain myth, you only need to look at Alabama's dark data. Over 100 experienced outdoorsmen vanished near Little River Canyon, leaving behind nothing but neatly stacked gear and baffled K-9 units. When searchers actually find bodies at the base of cliffs, coroners quickly dismiss them as falls. But they willfully ignore forensic reports of skulls shattered by smooth spherical river stones. More terrifying are the dozens of missing toddlers who impossibly survive freezing nights in the Appalachian foothills. But they all return with identical stories of small friends who fed them berries in the dark. The true horror isn't that these Cherokee legends kill trespassers, but rather that they claim them, dragging victims deep underground until they simply stop being human. Consider this a factual warning. If you ever decide to go hunting for relics in the Appalachian Mountains of Alabama, don't. The Cherokee legends weren't just metaphors. They were warnings about things that claim you and drag you underground until you simply stop being human. But if you think a rock to the skull is bad, you haven't met the Walker County creature. In the deep canyons of the Bankhead Forest, locals report a 7-foot beast that doesn't just watch you, it perfectly mimics the voices of the people you love to lure you into a vacuum of total Oz factor silence. What do you do when a legend that has haunted the Alabama bluffs since the 1960s finally decides to climb down from the cliffs and look you in the eye? In the deep canyons of the Appalachian Mountains, locals have spent decades whispering about a massive man-like being that mimics the voices of the lost and watches the living with a disturbing human-like smile. But for a man struggling to stay sane enough to win back his wife, that whistle in his bunker vents isn't just a ghost story. It's the sound of his last chance at a life being torn to pieces. Cutter scraped the razor across his jawline, washing away the grit of the Appalachia mud. "I'm coming home," he whispered. He hit record on his smartphone. "Day 14, Sarah. I'm taking my meds. I'm keeping the bunker clean." He organized his generic Medicaid pill bottles with trembling hands. In his hand-dug bunker beneath the Bankhead National Forest, routine meant survival. It meant proving he was fit to reconcile with his ex-wife. The air hung heavy with damp stone and the rhythmic hiss of his duct-taped CPAP machine. Cutter sat on his twin-sized cot, brushing his thumb over a framed photograph of a young boy. "Good night, buddy," he whispered. He placed the picture beside a heavy, polished urn, pulled the wool blanket to his chin, and let sleep drag him under. Sometime after midnight, the Sipsey wilderness cicadas stopped. The abrupt quiet sucked the air from the room. Cutter focused on the machine's steady hiss to keep his spiraling thoughts grounded. But a wet, melodic whistle pushed through the intake vent, Sarah's favorite lullaby. His heart hammered against his ribs. Just wind whistling through the surface pipe, he told himself. Exhaustion outweighed paranoia. He strapped the clunky CPAP mask tightly over his face to block the noise and forced himself back to sleep. An hour later, an operatic, blood-curdling scream ripped directly through the plastic tubing, vibrating his teeth. Cutter's eyes fluttered open. The clock blinked 1:14 a.m. He shifted in a cold sweat, desperately untangling the rigid plastic hosing from his neck. What the hell was that noise? He scrambled to his laptop. The exterior camera feed showed only a thick, white wall of fog. Gripping his handgun, he crept up the wooden ladder and pushed the heavy steel hatch open just inches. The freezing air bit his skin. A massive, elongated shadow stood motionless beside his Starlink dish. The screaming had stopped. Convinced the fog was twisting dead pines, Cutter let the hatch fall shut, bolted the steel, and retreated to his cot. But as his breathing slowed in the dark, fingernails scratched violently against the inside of his CPAP hose. By 10 a.m., a cold, relentless rain hammered the forest. Cutter threw on a green poncho and grabbed his rifle to check his snare traps. This is going to be a long day. The environment fought him. Thick mud sucked at his boots. 30 minutes into the trek, his chest tightened. He patted his pockets for his midday dose, but they were empty. He had left his Medicaid bottles sitting uselessly on the nightstand. Jagged, unmedicated anxiety spiked in his veins. But a guttural, operatic scream tore through the wet timber. Someone was out there. Cutter gripped his rifle and pushed through the briars toward the sound. He tracked the agonizing noise for 15 minutes, breaking through the tree line onto a sheer limestone bluff. What he saw standing on the opposite ridge was confusing and terrifying. A massive, man-like being stood 100 feet away across the gap. Its limbs hung awkwardly past its knees. The creature locked eyes with Cutter. Its pale lips stretched into a wide, impossibly intelligent human smile. It threw its head back in a silent laugh, leaned forward, and dove flat-footed off the sheer cliff into the abyss. Cutter sprinted to the precipice, expecting to find a broken body below. The canyon floor was empty. The sky tore open. "Damn it!" Cutter yelled, as an Alabama flash flood unleashed a torrential downpour. The unnatural pressure warped his senses. Frightened and confused, he jogged blindly through the blinding gray wall to get home. He pushed through the thicket for an hour, his lungs burning. His boot caught a slick root and he fell hard into the freezing mud. Panting and bleeding, he pushed himself up. The fog briefly cleared. His stomach dropped. It was the exact same limestone ledge. The creature crouched on the slick rock, facing him. Without breaking eye contact, the thing threw its arms out wide like a twisted game. It leaned back and fell into a backward dive, swallowed instantly by the roaring floodwater. Cutter stumbled away. "What the hell is going on?" he whispered, gripping his rifle tightly. He jogged through the blinding rain until he finally located the muddy path back to his clearing. Shivering and frantic, he staggered into the open and reached the steel hatch. He had won the race against the mountain. But a wet, melodic whistle pushed through the heavy rain. Sarah's lullaby. Cutter spun around. 50 feet away, a shape shifted against a scorched pine tree. The creature sat cross-legged in the mud. It watched him. It smiled. Cutter raised his rifle and fired a single deafening shot directly at it. The thing immediately darted off into the dense forest with impossible speed. Cutter dove headfirst down the bunker shaft, spinning the heavy locking wheel until it groaned. He tore through his medical crate, but the reserve pill bottle was gone. He collapsed onto the dirt floor in the corner, pulling his knees to his chest. "Please God, please God, please God," Cutter muttered, holding his rifle in a death grip. His heart hammered as the wet whistling started again from the air vent, louder than ever. Without medication, his reality fractured. He grabbed a jagged limestone shard, pressing it against his forearm, needing the sting of blood to break the trance. He stopped. He dropped the stone, grabbed his satellite phone, dialed the emergency rangers, and begged for extraction. Hours later, Cutter snapped upright, gasping for air. The harsh hospital lights burned his eyes. He frantically pulled at the EKG wires taped to his chest, locking eyes with the doctor. "It was there," Cutter stammered. "It jumped backwards off the cliff. I ran back home but saw it again. Are the Rangers okay? Did it get them?" The doctor set down his clipboard, his voice steady. "The Rangers are fine, Cutter. You suffered a perfect storm of southern pine beetle dust poisoning, which causes severe hallucinations, combined with heavy carbon dioxide buildup in that bunker." Cutter shook his head wildly. "Are you sure? It's trying to fool you." The doctor smiled sympathetically. "Get some rest. Get some water in you. You'll feel fine by tomorrow." Cutter sank back against the pillows. He accepted the clinical logic. He had simply lost his sanity, and with it, he had lost Sarah. Released the next morning, Cutter trudged back to the bunker to pack up his total failure. He climbed down the ladder and stopped. Sarah stood in the cramped room, frantically throwing his gear into cardboard boxes. "My love!" Cutter yelled, relief flooding his chest. Sarah didn't smile. Her face was chalk white with absolute terror. She grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin, and whispered, "Cutter, we have to go, now!" They scrambled up the ladder, but as Cutter reached the top rung, his gaze swept over his laptop. The security camera footage looped a timestamp from 3 hours ago, while he was still in the hospital. On the screen, the massive creature stood inches from the lens, filling the frame with its human-like smile, whistling his wife's lullaby. This isn't just hearsay. In October 1967, a driver near the Mulberry Fork saw this creature somersault onto the road, stand on 2 legs, and give a terrifyingly human smile before jumping off a sheer cliff. While the Sipsey mimic claims the forest, it might not be the oldest thing there. History tells us of a territorial war that dates back even further, a battle between the Cherokee and a race of pale, nocturnal hunters with glowing, milky blue eyes known as the Moon-Eyed People. What do you do when the woods you've known your whole life suddenly decide to eat you? But when the thing lurking in the pitch-black Alabama hollows has glowing, milky blue eyes and the strength to snap a bear's neck, surviving isn't about being tough. It's about blind luck. Try the ignition. The alternator's still breathing, his grandfather grunted, wiping black grease onto a shop rag. The heavy metal hood of the rusted utility mule slammed shut with a bone-rattling crunch. Early rubbed his sweaty palms raw against the denim of his jeans, the invisible handshake. 17 years old, 6 feet flat, and 190 pounds of calloused Appalachian muscle meant nothing when the internal battle raged. 3 years ago, his grandfather pulled Early and his sister from a rotting trailer and drug-addicted parents, providing a solid roof and hot meals deep in the Sipsey wilderness of Alabama. Early knew his grandfather loved him. He would walk through fire for the old man. But a dark, broken part of the teenager's brain desperately needed to hear the words. Instead, he remained the designated errand boy. His sister was officially getting the pristine '72 Chevy parked in the garage. Early knew she needed the reliable car, but the silence in his head twisted the logic, whispering it was undeniable proof he simply wasn't good enough. His grandfather shoved a crinkled pharmacy bag through the mule's open window. "Mr. Vern left his spare inhaler on the kitchen counter after y'all went fishing this morning," the old man said, his eyes deadly serious. "His asthma is locking his lungs up tight. He won't make it through the night. Get down the mountain before dark, boy." It wasn't a suggestion. It operated as law. Early cranked the engine. A flake of oxidized iron rained from the rusted cab roof and sliced into Early's left cornea. Blinking away the sting did nothing. A dull, watering ache settled into his vision. He shifted the mule into gear and started the slow 15-mile trek down the winding edge of the Appalachian Mountains. He patted his jacket pocket, feeling the crinkle of the fruit snacks he had packed. His blood sugar had a habit of dropping fast, and he needed them for the long drive. Before pulling onto the asphalt, he popped his last piece of nicotine gum into his mouth and chewed hard. The unpowered steering wheel fought his every muscle. He muscled the tires around a blind cliffside curve. But a wall of blinding, oscillating blue strobes flooded the windshield. An autonomous logging convoy crawled ahead at 10 miles an hour, blocking the entire lane. How could he beat the sunset and save Mr. Vern while trapped behind thoughtless machines? "I'll take the old dirt logging detour," Early thought, his grip tightening. "I'll bypass this mess, drop off the medicine and be home before dark. I can do this." Impatient and desperate to prove his worth, Early yanked the steering wheel hard right, forcing the tires into the overgrown dirt path. His jaw ached. The last piece of nicotine gum had lost its flavor, and the creeping withdrawal spiked his rage. The truck's jammed window invited a swarm of humid Alabama mosquitoes to feast on his neck. The eroded dirt shoulder crumbled, threatening a 50-foot plunge into the creek below. But then, the mule violently bottomed out. A hidden limestone pothole swallowed the wheel, shattering the front axle with a deafening crack. The engine choked and died. Early punched the cracked dashboard in frustration, scraping his knuckles raw. Of course, he thought bitterly. Can't even drive 5 miles without messing up. He stared at the slanted hood, the reality of his failure sinking in. But Mr. Verne was out of time. Early shoved the rusted door open and stepped down into the mud. "All right," he whispered to the empty woods, accepting his fate. "Let's just get the medicine to Mr. Verne." He clutched the pharmacy bag and walked into the encroaching twilight. 2 miles deep into the detour, the pungent stench of wet fur and fresh scat coated the humid air. Early paused. He knelt in the mud. Massive, deep-clawed paw prints pressed into the soft earth. "Please," he thought, wiping a cold sweat from his forehead. "Please don't let there be a bear out here. Not today." He picked up his pace, keeping his eyes glued to the dark tree line. But 15 minutes later, a massive brown bear stepped out from the laurel thicket, occupying the center of the trail. Early threw his arms up, tearing a primal scream from his throat to make himself look big. The bear dropped to all fours and charged, but a pale gray sheen blur slammed into the apex predator from the upper tree line. The impact registered with a sickening crunch of thick bone. The blur dragged the 400-pound animal into the heavy briars. Early dove behind a rotting hemlock. His heart hammered against his ribs. The chaotic sounds of the bear being ripped apart abruptly stopped. A high-pitched guttural screech dropped from the dense canopy directly above Early's head. What unseen nightmare now hunted the hunter? Early pressed his cheek flat against the wet bark. The overwhelming metallic odor of copper flooded his sinuses. He rubbed his left eye furiously, a hot tear leaking down his dirt-streaked face as the iron flake from the truck still dug into his cornea. Between the stinging pain and the watery haze, his brain refused to process the image. Had a mere blur just taken out a 400-pound apex predator? His damaged eye struggled to focus as a second entity dropped from the high branches. Through the blinding tears, he made out translucent shrink-wrapped skin stretched over impossible, elongated muscles. It collided with the first pale creature directly over the steaming bear carcass. They tore into each other with blazing, unnatural speed. This wasn't a hunt. It was a territorial war over fresh meat. Early clamped his shaking hands over his ears, his breath hitching painfully. "This isn't real," his fractured mind pleaded, trying to categorize the spindly geometry of the creatures. "It's just my blood sugar. I'm hallucinating." But the wet, heavy tearing of muscle and bone anchored him firmly to the waking nightmare. The second creature snapped the first one's neck with a wet pop and plunged its featureless face into the bear's ribcage. Early shifted his weight backward to slip away, but a dry birch twig snapped beneath his boot, echoing like a gunshot. The frantic chewing immediately stopped. Would the victor ignore the disruption? The pale, blood-soaked head snapped toward Early's tree. The creature dropped to all fours and charged. Early sprinted blindly. But the massive spike of pure adrenaline burned through his remaining glucose instantly. His stomach hollowed out. A severe hypoglycemic crash ripped through his system, painting glowing light trails across his vision. His legs turned to water. He hit the dirt hard, tasting dead leaves and copper. He desperately needed the sugar from the fruit snacks in his pocket, but his muscles refused to obey. The creature mounted his chest, pinning his arms to the forest floor. Massive, milky blue eyes locked onto his face, radiating a terrifying bioluminescent eyeshine. The feral stench of rotting meat coated Early's throat. The moon-eyed monster bared jagged, bloody teeth. A translucent, spindly hand clamped onto Early's ankle with the sheer force of an industrial vice. It hauled him backward into the jagged briars. The country boy dragged effortlessly through the mud. Early wailed, hot urine soaking his jeans as the creature ripped him 500 feet deep into the uncharted Sipsey wilderness hollows. The darkness swallowed them entirely. But a second pale blur dropped from the canopy like a missile, tackling Early's captor. Could he find his feet, get his sugar levels up, and escape while the monsters tore each other to pieces? The concussive impact of the tackle physically threw Early 3 feet through the air. He hit the slick mud hard. The two massive beings locked into a brutal, shrieking death match. Early scrambled to his hands and knees. He blindly dug his bleeding fingers through the mud, gripping the inhaler. He ripped the fruit snacks from his pocket with his teeth, swallowing the sugar dry to shock his system back to life. He pushed off the ground and sprinted toward the distant, flickering yellow glow of cabin lights. He burst into the clearing, lungs burning, hours past dusk. His grandfather's '72 Chevy sat parked in the gravel driveway. Early braced his shoulders. He prepared for the screaming, the heavy disappointment, the final undeniable proof of his failure. He shoved the heavy wooden cabin door open. He stood in the frame, sobbing, holding the tiny plastic inhaler out like a shield. His grandfather didn't yell. The old man crossed the living room in 2 massive strides and wrapped Early in a desperate, bone-crushing hug. The rigid tension drained completely from Early's spine. His palms stopped sweating. The invisible handshake vanished. The internal battle ended. He dropped his tired arms and hugged the old man back. He wasn't an errand boy. He wasn't a mule. He was loved. But as Early finally caught his breath, the old man slowly pulled away. His grandfather's eyes drifted past Early's shoulder, locking onto the dark window facing the gravel driveway. The gruff warmth drained from the old man's face, replaced by a pale, stony dread. "Early," his grandfather whispered, staring at a towering, shrink-wrapped silhouette standing motionless beside the pristine Chevy. "Did you bring a friend?" "You've seen the moon-eyed people, the nocturnal, spindly muscled hunters with a grip like an industrial vice who can snap a bear's neck like a dry twig. The true horror of the Appalachians isn't just that these legends are real. It's that they've followed us home. If you want more Appalachian Mountains horror stories, click here. I'm the Shadow Teller. Stay safe from the dark.